Hey guys, this is my 5-minute Why You Should Read Empire the Vampire by Kristoff. There we go. Who is the target audience for this? I would say that the target audience for this is people who want to read epic fantasy, high fantasy, adventure fantasy, and quest fantasy. This is adult with YA crossover. And by that I mean this is 16 plus. There are monstrous vampires who are trying to take over the world using violence. There's very goth Christianity in this story. By that I mean there are warrior monks and nuns using holy magic to fight against the vampires. Overall, the book had a very grimdark and gothic vibe with the vampires. There's lots of silver. There's sort of a Van Helsing vibe of fighting back against monsters and creatures of the night. There are a few paragraphs of torture, so if you're not in the mood for that, maybe skip that chapter. You'll know that chapter when you get there. Lots of people die, including some named characters. This is a very brutal world. Bad things happened. But there's no sexual assault. Everything which occurs is consensual. I felt that this book had a good love story in it, at least in my opinion. I'm not really the biggest fan of love stories. And also this book made use of the enemies to lovers trope, or enemies to friends, not quite enemies to lovers. I'm sure some people are going to be shipping that. But anyway, and I enjoyed the fight scenes in this book. Now, what are some similar books to this? I would say Gideon the Ninth. Now, bear with me. That book is a space sci-fi necromancer lesbian book. This is a epic fantasy book with vampires. In terms, they're similar in that they have a dark tone. They have dark characters in terms of being very death-focused. And also, this baby has lots of curse words in it. And it didn't quite take itself so seriously at times in terms of the character dialogue. That's why I'd compare it to Gideon the Ninth. Just don't go expecting pop culture jokes or memes, because that's not in here. Similarly, I'd compare its setting to Sabriel by Garth Nix. That book is pretty old now, but if you haven't read it, that book takes place in a fallen kingdom which has been overrun by vampires, zombies, ghosts, that sort of thing, and humanity only survives in a few cities. This book is like that. I'd also compare it to Interview with a Vampire. Now, that said, I've not actually read Interview with a Vampire myself. However, the frame narrative for this book is the protagonist having an interview with a vampire. So it applies, I assume. And finally, I'd compare it to His Dark Materials books. The reason being is that this book, Empire of the Vampire, had a distinct, I'd say, anti-religious bent. I was pleasantly surprised by this book. This book had a goth punk vibe sort of going on, and while I'm not either goth or punk, I expected not to like it, honestly. However, I wound up enjoying my time reading this. I think this book will probably wind up in being my top 5 books I've read this year. And for some major positive vibes or aspects I enjoyed about this book, I enjoyed the dual narrative structure. Basically, the author told 2 different stories, one taking place in the distant past and one taking place in the future. And then he combined them like that. I liked it. I thought it worked well. It set up good characterization. Speaking of which, the protagonist, De Leon. In this book, he got 2 plot arcs, one which occurred in the past and one which occurred in the future. This was good. It's like we got 2 books worth of characterization in one book. I like that a lot. A lot of fantasy books don't really get into that sort of thing. Okay? See you around.